My name is Barbara Gale. I'm an attorney in Georgia, mostly retired. I say that because I would be totally retired except for all the RSOL work I'm doing. And I became connected with RSOL a couple of years ago. I was so pleased to find this organization. I'd been trying to do a lot of stuff on my own, writing articles. It's on. It's on. It's just me. There we go. There we go. He tells me to put it in my mouth. Only if he puts chocolate on it, okay? Okay, is this better? Now can you hear me? All right. So I was so excited to find RSOL. I went to the conference last year. I came home just totally inspired. Larry came down, got a bunch of us from Georgia together, and we started our own Georgia group this year. There's only still a few of us, but we're working, and so, you know, we're going to get there. My cohort in crime today, is Andy Stein. He is really should be in charge of the Georgia RSOL group. He does all the work, but I let them think that it's really me, but it's really Andy. The title of and I'm standing up because I'm used to standing up. I'm a lawyer. When I talk, the judges say, stand up. And so I intended to sit down, and I will in a minute. But part of our thing today is what to expect. And I just got this magazine, and I couldn't help but bring it. Can any of you see what magazine this is? Double ARP, you know, I just celebrated a significant birthday. And can you imagine my confusion with the photograph? I don't know if you can see the photograph that I found in the middle of the AARP magazine. And I'm thinking, how many of our registered citizens, if they had this in their homes, could be violated and sent back to prison? We have gone so crazy as a society. That's not why I'm here today, but I wanted just to show you how innocently something can happen that has an impact. We start off today with talking what to expect. And what to expect, if we can go to the first slide, with 4 different areas. We got it yet? Give her a second. Okay. What to expect. And I want to start out just very briefly with when you're first convicted. When you're first convicted, you know, you're in a county jail. You get sent to a diagnostic facility with the prison system. And at that diagnostic facility, they do physical exams. They do mental exams. Some of the states will do a risk assessment at that time based on your crime. During the first few weeks there, you have no contact. There's no visitation at all during assessment time. After a little while, you can make phone calls out. You cannot get mail. They take your clothes in Georgia and throw them away. They give you a uniform, and you better have clothes. You know, you'll have clothes provided when you finally parole out. What would you like to add to what else they do at assessment?
I was having a conversation with a friend recently and talking about your intake process of your physical examination, and it's 50 guys standing around as if you came out of your mama's tummy, and you're standing shoulder to shoulder or front to back. It's pretty humiliating.
They do shave your head. They make your photograph, which then is put on the website for the world to see. And then they make a determination based on your crime as to what facility you need to be sent to. And one thing I can say in Georgia, and I think it's probably true in other places, is they try to send sex offenders to certain facilities so that there's some amount of protection, I guess, with being with people with similar crimes. Would you say that's true?
Sort of like herd protection. Sure.
Sure. When you get to that facility, they have a new program in Georgia, and I think I know there's some other states that have this as well, that are called reentry programs. Well, reentry program you think would come at the end, but really it starts now. They look at the prisoners coming in and they try to find individuals that they think are going to be successful and with the programs. And so they will pick a small handful, and you are now in the reentry program. They make you attend certain classes. Everybody's required to attend certain classes, but if you're in this reentry program, you kind of you've got to go this path. It's sort of like a college prep class. You got to take these classes to be successful, to be continued in the reentry program. There are a few classes that are required if you're a sex offender before you are eligible for parole. Would you like to talk about those?
Classes before parole?
Yes.
That the classes are, you'll hear people talk about them as being just a way for the state to make money from like federal programs or whatever. Personally, from my own personal experience, and I've seen other people on both sides, so I have no consistency behind it. If you take the program, you may get out. If you take it, you may not. If you don't, you may get out. If you don't, you may not get out. It goes both ways. I've seen it happen in both cases. There's no consistency behind it. And they ultimately want you to admit guilt to your crime, even if you ended up under circumstances where you just had to plea out, even though you're not guilty. Everyone says they're not guilty in prison, but it's just they put a carrot in front of you to try and get you to follow their programs, but they don't necessarily follow through on their side of it.
Next slide, please. The thing that's incredible about prison, and I was amazed when I first heard this, is that they don't feed you lunch on Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays, or holidays when there is regular visitation. Visitation is on Saturdays and Sundays. It's now relatives, and I'm not sure if they've gotten rid of fiancés yet or not, but just about. And so that's why you have to send them money, and you have to set up a PayPal account. And those PayPal accounts in Georgia, JPay, I'm sorry, JPay is now in Florida. So if you want to send a prisoner in Georgia money, it goes to Florida, and then 3 weeks later it winds up on their books so that they can go buy soups. That's the new currency in prison, is packages of ramen noodles, so that they have something to eat on the weekends at lunchtime. If you go to visit, you can take $20 in quarters and eat out of the machines with your loved one. You cannot send money to them unless you are on the visitation list. And so they're restricting more and more who can send money. They're afraid of, have your family send me money so I'll protect you kind of thing. So they're trying to get rid of that. Would you say that's true?
But it seems then it becomes a complete tax and burden on the family. Forget that it's whoever that you left out there on the street that's willing to help you. Now it's become a complete burden on just your immediate loved ones, because you can only put a handful of people on your visitation list.
That's true. There's only a few people. Telephone calls, global tel link, $5 for 15 minutes. And so you have to kind of limit your contact. Some of the prisons, they are starting, they've introduced iPads and are allowing FaceTime. You can pay for so much FaceTime. Some of the prisons now have faith-based dorms, and for any of you who are people of faith, that's a little safer environment for some of those folks, because they have a common faith system, and it's a safer environment. We all worry about the safety and the gangs and that sort of thing. You can't help but worry about it. Do not watch Lockup on TV. It will just freak you out.
I just because you're not necessarily faith-based doesn't mean you should be in a violent dorm.
I agree.
And I never had any problems personally, but I am not a person of faith, and therefore I should be restricted to general population to have my hiney beat.
I have a very close relative, my son, who was not in a faith-based program. There were no openings. His first week there, he saw a fella get his throat slit, and another guy tried to help that person. Well, a week later, he was murdered. And so as a parent, you're sitting at home and you are terrified. This should not be going on. I called the news stations. I said, why is this on TV? It was not reported. I could find no report of that crime anywhere. And then later we get a subpoena for him to go and testify. It's like, not just no, but hell no. You know, they can find where you live. And so there's always that fear, and that's a horrible, horrible thing. We don't want to focus on that. If we go to the next, once you are released, parole is something that everybody hopes for. And finding, you know, people writing letters to parole may or may not help. Some people it has helped, some people it has not helped. When you get into the prison, you're assigned a counselor, and that person is the best guide as to what an individual needs to do to be able to make parole. They're going to tell you, take these classes, do this, I'm looking into your background. Their recommendations go a long way. Would you agree with that?
Certainly.
Let's see, I already got that one. Once you have been released on parole, I'm going to talk about the sex offender registry first. We'll go back to housing because that's the number one thing, but I do want you to know that once you are released, then you are required within 48 hours to register. You go to the county of your offense and you have to register. Thereafter, you have to register within 3 days of your birthday.
Let me chime in on that one. On my first anniversary of registering, I went to the sheriff's office according to the letter that I received, and it says you must appear to the sheriff's office within 72 hours of your birthday. Do you include your birthday with that? Could you go on your birthday, or do you have to be there the day prior? So you end up with this possible 1 day buffer window where you're not sure if you're there too early or did you get there too late. So I chose, my birthday's on the 19th, so I chose to be on the 18th. Figure I can't go wrong with that one. The officer says to me, "You're late." I said, "What do you mean I'm late?" He goes, "Well, you're supposed to be here prior to 72 hours. I'm thinking, wait, prior to 72 hours? That means I could have come the day after my last birthday. That would be prior to my birthday, right? And he was like, "Well, I'm not going to do anything about it today." I was like, okay, but I thought I was on time. So I just wanted to chime in on the 72-hour deal.
There's always these little steps, and you have to talk to people. That's the most important thing I can tell you, is talk to other people who are in a similar situation. We have a friend of ours in our Georgia group that was amazed at the things that she has learned that her own child is going to be facing with the parole, with what to do when you get out. Before you can be paroled, you have to have an approved address. Now, on the registry, depending on the state you're in, you can't live, you know, it's, I think, 300 feet in one state, up to 2,500 feet in other states, from churches, schools, parks. Georgia has added libraries. There's some states that include, you know, any place a child gathers, bus stops. If you don't already have a home out in the middle of nowhere and you're trying to find a home, it's very difficult. So that you have to get Google and you find the address that you're trying to find. You know, is there anything in that vicinity? In the South, we have churches on every corner. So to try to find a place to live where there is not a church within 1,000 feet in Georgia is almost unheard of. We were searching out in the country and we found a wonderful place, and we drove up to the next road and turned, and guess what? There was a church. And they're not all listed. You would think, okay, I can go to the Chamber of Commerce and get a list of churches. They spring up overnight. You know, that doesn't work. The residency restrictions and the work restrictions are just about the same. So if the person is coming out and they're going to try to find employment, they face the same problems with getting the Google search. Okay, there's a possibility of applying for a job here. Should I even apply? And then you do your diameter to see, and then you start a whole other thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. Is that?
Yes. What I would tell you if you're trying to do this is you can get a free license for Google Earth Professional. And the reason why that tool is so useful is that they have the ability to draw circles, and it will measure out 1,000 feet. So you take the corner of the property, and you can then expand out and draw a big circle, and you can see inside that range if something pops up that you can't be around. It's been really helpful for me in trying to figure out what I can and can't do. You're looking for Google Earth Professional, and they have a free license. So, I mean, they used to charge you for it, and it's a really slick app in general, but for this particular purpose, it is incredibly handy. I don't know how people did it. This is something recently that they released within the last year or two. I don't know how people did it before.
It was very difficult.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this the same housing restrictions when you come out of federal prison as well?
Oh. Okay. Okay.
If you're based on the registry and the distance, right. Also, one of the things you have to consider on the registry is presence restrictions. Janice Bellucci was fighting these in California. Some municipalities, that's a fun word to say on a Friday afternoon, have ordinances that restrict anyone who is on the registry from being within their city limits or their town limits. Janice has been really successful in getting rid of a lot of those in California. They're cropping up in other places. It's a violation of your constitutional rights, but then you got to fight that. So I just want you to be aware of that. Duration of the registry, it depends again on the state you're from, and some states have lifetime registry. Some states have, depending on your particular offense, you'd have to look at your own state to determine. And some have a tier registry where it depends on the tier of your crime, whether it's a level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3s generally are your serious predators, and their lifetime just about everywhere. Is that your understanding? Some states also allow petitions for removal. If anybody's here from Georgia, I have some of the paperwork on that. In Georgia, if you're a level 1 lowest offense, after 10 years of your sentence being completed, you're no longer on paper, not on parole, not on probation, and you haven't had any subsequent arrests, you can file a petition to be removed. Now, I want to tell you that this is not a slam dunk procedure. The prosecution has the right to fight that. It has to be filed in court, and the prosecutor can come up with all kinds of reasons, like the gentleman who spoke earlier about the reasons why you should not be permitted off. But there is at least a vehicle there that you can attempt to get removed from the registry. Okay? And we've already talked about international travel. That's something else that the registry affects, and that was covered earlier today. We can go to the next slide, please. Luckily, in Georgia, we don't have any of these signs yet. I have heard of some states that require individuals to post a sign. Again, the registry restrictions of the distance requirements, anywhere from 300, 2,500 feet, I believe, is in Alabama. Denial to public housing. I was really fortunate to be invited to be a part of a small group of people. The Georgia Justice Project is working on a housing project and invited me to attend because they realize the problem with housing. We have folks who are in prison who cannot get out on parole because they have no place to go. They don't have family that live in a place where they can go. Shelters it's limited, the number of shelters who will take sex offenders. And public housing, there's pretty much just a restriction that says, no, you cannot live here. Cohabitation restrictions, you can't live with other felons. I was made aware of a situation. A lady called me last week. Her husband was set to get out on parole. A fella had built a house, had been seeking approval to be able to offer housing to sex offenders who were being paroled, and the city filed a lawsuit and got an injunction to keep him from being able to do that. There are still a few places that will take sex offenders, but there aren't many. The good thing about this group, and I was so tickled that they asked me to appear, is that they are going to start working with, first of all, the insurance commissioner, because the way you look at this is if we allow sex offenders to come on our properties, whether as a private landlord or particularly a government public housing, and that sex offender does something, are we then civilly liable in damages to that victim? And so that's where that hesitancy comes with allowing sex offenders to live on your property. So the group has agreed, and several of the individuals are meeting with the insurance commissioner to see if we can develop something to submit to the legislature next year, this is in Georgia, to say, you know, if you get approved to be a housing facility for sex offenders, we will put some sort of a waiver in the insurance guidelines so that you don't have that liability thing hanging over your head. And you can understand that. And if somebody's gonna get hurt and they're gonna get sued for $5 million because you allowed a sex offender to come in here and he raped my 5-year-old, you're not gonna let them anywhere close to you. So that's one thing. The other thing they're trying to do is to work with the Department of Community Supervision, and they were also in the group to see if we can get more cooperation from the Department of Community Supervision to come up with shelters that they will approve. Yes, sir.
So you have landlord hesitancy there. I recently, within the last month or so, I go out walking in the morning, so I'm on a 3-mile walk, and I go by this. It was the perfect house, and I was like, this is going to be great. So I call the company to see what the deal was. It was in the right price range for me. And I looked on the Google Earth thing that I just talked about, and it was there was nothing there. There's a big railroad yard just to the south of it. There's kind of a church, but it doesn't have a daycare, so that would have passed. And I immediately after I called and looked at it, I called my probation officer. I said, check this address out. It was a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, they had rented the property. And I just happened to say, would you guys have done a background check? It's owned by a bunch of real estate attorneys. You think they were going to do a background check? They weren't going to do one. I could have moved in, had 1 month deposit and 1 month rent. I would have been in the place. But because probation then held things up, not that they were necessarily slow. I mean, you know, they were on the job for 18 hours to do it. But still, you have to end up with the perfect storm of, is the address going to be approved? Can you get to the property and get it approved before the landlord has the opportunity to rent it out to somewhere else? So you're trying to do this chicken and the egg thing. You don't want to waste the landlord's time. You don't want to put money down to have probation turn around and dump it on you to where where they won't let you rent it. So I just wanted to share that story of personal. Yes, sir.
I'm from Missouri. I just wanted to suggest the state has software, so if you put an address, then it will tell you if it is qualifying or not.
What is the name of the software that would tell you that?
There's a Missouri Highway Patrol.
Okay, so Missouri has a specific application.
And I think it's reasonable you should request that. It would save you a lot of time.
Certainly, but I'm still it would appear that even if I got that, I still would have taken that and said, oh, hey, this software would have told my probation officer that it's approved. Do you think my probation officer is going to trust my word and say, sure, go ahead?
I think it needs to come from the state.
Agreed, but I still have to get my probation officer to then approve it. So, I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, and it would be a valuable tool. You're stuck still at a catch-22 of who goes first.
We do have another group. Dr. Jean Kennedy is here. There she is. We're trying to find real estate investors who will buy properties to rent that are in the proper zones to rent to sex offenders because there is such a need. I know myself and my son have gone driving around trying to see if we could find properties that would suffice if we could find then a real estate investor, because if they can get somebody in there and they're getting the money, then, you know, that would be a win-win situation for them. But it's going to take some time. Okay, next slide. I think we're to employment. Employment is a real issue. You have the registry restrictions, which just start off saying that you can't work in any of these places that are within that distance. So you go to, whether you go to the unemployment office or you go to Goodwill, which has an employment well, the first thing is that you got your registry restrictions. So if you finally find a company that is not within whatever distance, then you have to ask for a background check. Now, they will ask for a background check. Everybody now, it seems, does background checks. Jobs that you used to be able to get, you can't get anymore without a background check. And I thought, I do adoption law, and with adoptions, we have to have a background check. And you get this one little sheet of paper, and it says no offenses. And I file that with my adoption paperwork, and that's all you get. Well, I was amazed to find the background check that is done for employers now. There's a couple of companies, and I don't have their names off the top of my head, who do these, but they list every address you've ever had, if you've ever filed bankruptcy, if you've ever been to prison, where that prison was, how long you were there, if you've ever been revoked. It's like a social history, like you're applying for a job with the FBI. I was amazed. And so it's no wonder that people can't pass these background checks. How many of us, when I was in college, I lived in about 47 places. How does that make me look as far as being a secure person to go to work for them? So that's a real disabling factor, wouldn't you say?
Totally agree.
The reentry programs, I mentioned those earlier about when you go into prison, you can apply for a reentry program. If you are successful and if you do the programs that they give you throughout prison, they will help you find housing and employment on the other side. Again, that's such a small number. We talked to a fellow from Georgia who is in the governor's reentry program, and they're trying to expand it, but this was what they had come up with initially, where they just picked these few people. If you're already out of prison, they have nothing to help you here, and I understand it's the same way in other states.
You're talking about post-reentry programs,
Yes.
post-prison.
Yes.
Because everyone inside goes through a reentry program, go through a 3-week class with a real quick resume thing. You might do some interview, training kind of things. But you got guys that have had 20 years in prison. What are they supposed to write on their resume?
Right. And the other thing, we talked about the insurance liability with people renting to you. Think about what it is for someone to be employed by you. Because the liability statutes say that if I hire someone and they commit a crime, then I could be, if they're doing it while they are on working hours, I can be sued as their employer for failing to properly supervise them. How many employers are going to take on that kind of responsibility or liability? I had a secretary one time who was having an affair with the ex-husband of a client of mine, unbeknownst to me. And they all showed up in my parking lot, and my paralegal came and told me that my secretary was beating the heck out of the new wife of her ex-husband in my parking lot. Now, other than the fact that there was blonde hair everywhere because they were both blonde, and I told my paralegal to just call the police, and the GBI came and investigated because the ex-husband was a police officer. I'm sitting there going, I wonder if my insurance premium got paid this month. Who is going to sue me because my secretary went out the door and jumped on this gal? So you can imagine the concerns of employers. Not only is my employee going to accidentally bump up against a child and somebody say, oh, I saw his picture on the internet and I think he did that on purpose. The other thing is, are they going to come into my place of business and say, don't eat at this Pizza Hut because they hire sex offenders? So you have that kind of thing. How do you even fight that? Comment?
Oh, I got a bunch. The My main client, I'm self-employed, I work from home. My main client, I've had pretty long conversations, with the owner in discussing that, and they love the work that I do. They're very pleased with all the work that I do, and I'm allowed on site for a total of 1 day a week, if that. And I usually just travel up there around the holidays, like for the Christmas party or whatever. But he has had lengthy conversations with his attorneys to see what kind of liability does he have with having a registrant on the property. He's been told that there isn't really an issue with it. However, all you have to do is have somebody make some sort of allegation, and you wouldn't have any sort of defense. So going back to the whole idea of starting your own business just seems to be a significantly safer route.
Yes, sir.
I got out in 2010, during my time, and was promptly told that there's the federal bonding program, right?
Yes.
Within a year, I think it's
$6,000 tax credit.
right. Your first employer, if you're employed within 12 months after you are released from prison, the federal government will bond you for that company as a protection, or, and they get the tax credit.
Right.
However, you can't tell them that when they don't interview you.
Right.
Once you put in the application, and everything's online now. They see they see your thing, see your offense, and you can't even get in and tell them. The federal government will bond money for you and protect you from that liability. So that's
So-
the hurdle you gotta get over.
Right. To repeat what was just said is that it's great that the federal government offers a bonding program that gives the employer a sense of comfort that if you go in there and tear up the place or whatever, that there would be they get a tax credit for all this. However, it's really hard to even get that first job. So by the time that 12 months is up, you probably didn't find the job for them to even try and claim that tax credit.
So why not put that on the cover letter?
Yes, that is a recommendation from the reentry program, is to put on there that, hey, look, if you hire me, here's one of your perks out of this deal.
When we were at the Georgia Justice Project at the Capitol earlier this year, one of the bills proposed was to give a tax credit to employers who would hire individuals who had just gotten out of prison. And we didn't even get into whether or not they were going to include sex offenders because we knew what the answer was going to be. But there was such a backlash just from that. The legislators said, why should we work so hard for people who have screwed up? Why don't we just, let them take their knocks, and the people who haven't screwed up should get all the jobs? How do you fight that? It's very difficult. Next slide, please. Some of this is crisscrossing because some of these things do, they're different categories.
May I say something?
Yes.
You might try, and we'll call it that, compassion, and to put yourself in my shoes, and maybe it's your son, and would you like your son to receive small break? What, they've already paid their
Their debt to society.
they've done their time, at least give them a chance.
The one thing that I said to the legislator that said that to me, I said, how would you like for your life to be defined by the worst day of your life? If the whole rest of your life had to be defined by a stupid mistake that you made. And he didn't have a response to that. But I think that's what all of us in here are fighting. Why should the rest of your life be defined by the worst day? There's a little book that my son used to love, and I think there's a movie now, some little kid's very bad, horrible, Alexander's, very bad, awful, horrible, whatever day. That to me, it just defines what this whole thing is, because, who among any of us can look back and say, boy, that was just really something stupid I did. And would you like to have to list and put on your mailbox every stupid thing you ever did in your life? But now with the internet, you know, for our folks anyway, that's what happens. With parole, some places still use the leg monitor, and it just happened to be the picture. The thing that happens mostly now is there are smartphones, and they have a supervision services company that will call that smartphone, and you had better answer. And they call you 8, 10, 12 times a day, all through the night. You never get a decent night's sleep. And if you don't answer, then the call goes to the parole officer. So the way to make a parole officer really happy is to be in the shower and not take your smartphone with you, or to happen to go to the bathroom and not take the smartphone with you.
Or what happens when you have bad cell signal?
Yeah. You know, what if you're going somewhere and the signal is bad? Supervision with parole is much more so than with probation. Initially, unannounced to you, there will be 3 or 4 officers who will show up unannounced, and they will search your residence, checking for drugs, alcohol, weapons, whatever. Andy can tell you about his wonderful experience with that.
Penthouse. I'm sorry. Almost a year ago it was. They came 4 deep and sat me in a chair in the middle of the room and went through every inch of my room, walked out with all my equipment for me to have a job, and they held on to it for 10 days without any explanation as to really why. It wasn't really very provoked, and they just said, well, we can do this. And they took the stuff, and I mean, they left without me even having a phone. And so they were like, well, don't go far. We need to be able to get in touch with you if we need to. And yeah, so eventually they go through all of my stuff. They get their GBI guy or whatever they have, goes through the stuff, and they say, well, we didn't find anything. Okay, thanks. And then I was able to go back to work. Fortunately, this customer that I mentioned a minute ago, they know my situation, and they're very, very, very flexible. But to me, that comes at a cost. I just got a pay raise from them to where I now make about 50% of what the average market would pay me. That's the cost. So whereas prior to me being incarcerated, I was a very, very healthy breadwinner for my family, for my wife and son. And now I make the equivalent of, $20 an hour.
The other thing with supervision with you're on parole is they show up unannounced, usually 2 or 3 times a week. On probation, it's less, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The monitoring, I've mentioned that. Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
That happened to me twice, Andy.
Okay.
And they had somebody from the GBI, somebody from the Sheriff's Department, somebody from the Police Department, and here, this and this and this. Go through everything, check your computer.
Certainly.
And as a footnote, I have never, and I was on probation for 12 years, I have never known anybody make parole. You served every minute.
I did. I served every day. But I know 2 people right now that, well, one of them just came off parole and he's on probation. The other one is going to be on parole for 2 years. He's going to live through these things that Barbara's about to describe for 2 years. It's murder. In the back, sir?
I'm probably one of the few people, a little louder, and I'm one of the few people, I'll skip 2210. I did 4, here's 2 months.
So you got a 2210 and you did 4 years and 2 months? Is that what you said?
Now, I credit it for something that I won't forget. I'll stay out of the religious aspect. But I was actually in Florida. You knew someone that said, out of all the prisons in Georgia, Central was the best place to go to. When I went through my counseling,
Okay, so at diagnostics, you asked to go to Central, and so that's where you went? You spent all your time at Central? That's a rough prison, isn't it?
Well, at that time, there were about 875 inmates,
Right?
about 475 SOs,
Okay, 475 SOs.
probably 200 plus had murder convictions,
Right?
and the rest were still more harder questioning about theft or drugs. Those two rough guys.
Certainly, certainly.
There weren't any gangs until the latter part of my time.
Okay.
Going through the counseling that you were talking about, one of the first things, after I've been there about 6 months, I went to the counselor and told her I'd like to take one of the options of like carpentry, plumbing,
Right, a vocation class.
vocational classes. When I got to the chief counselor,
Okay.
she asked me something about which class I wanted to take, and I told her. And I told her I'd also like to take a sexual harassment assessment, student class.
SOPP?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
and she said, how much time do you have left? And I said, probably 8 years.
Right.
She said, you got plenty of time to take.
Yes. Yeah, they're not going to put you in classes. They often won't put you in classes early.
My comment to her was, nobody knows what God is going to do. She said, you're absolutely right. She put me in that class too.
Okay.
That class doesn't come up for 99.99% of the people
Right.
that were last year.
Correct.
99.99% max out their time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm aware. I'm aware. We got to move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Once you are out, you have some counseling while you're in prison, but once you get out, you have mandatory counseling that you have to attend, sex therapy classes, and I won't even go there. Most likely, there are going to be group sessions. There are some sessions that they do over the internet. Georgia is still using a shame-based therapy. Some states, and thank goodness for RSOL, we had a fella on last month, I think it was, that was talking about the changes that are coming along with that, where therapy is moving into building on your positives rather than on your negatives. But unfortunately, in Georgia, they're still working on shame and accountability. 10 minutes. Okay. Lie detector tests are required every 6 months. This is on parole and on probation. If you can just go to the next slide, it has the comparison. That's probation. Skip over to the one that has the comparison. Here we go. This shows you the comparisons with parole and probation for curfews, home checks, travel restrictions. My son was denied the ability to go to a funeral in the next county. Tell me why. Go to the next slide, please. The next slide is just going to compare the costs of fees. This is an amazing thing. Still not there. The comparison of fees with, here we go. If you don't have a job and you come out on parole, and you have somebody gives you a place to live, you're still looking at about $400 a month in fees to not go back to prison. On probation, it's a little bit less, but then when you're on probation, you do have to pay on your fine. So I just drew this up just to give you sort of an example of what you're looking at. Yes, ma'am. This is based on Georgia. It says an example. No. This is state law. This is state law.
I would also encourage everyone to go back about July of last year. There's a podcast called Freakonomics, and there's an episode around July, if I'm not mistaken. It was called "Why Do We Make Sex Offenders Pay and Pay and Pay?" And I want to say the number that they tally up in there is around $10,000. That you're just pretty much in the hole as soon as you step foot out of prison, between treatment and your probation fees and et cetera, polygraph tests, et cetera.
And then the last slide, and we'll finish up here. And if anybody has questions, you can catch us afterwards, is the impact on relationships. And you can go on to the next one. You know, the impact on your children, your family, your spouse. If you have a condition that says that you cannot live with your children, then does your spouse live with the children, or does she live with you? You know, you have to make that choice. Some of the things that I had considered, and I've talked to a couple of people, how to protect children from the knowledge that their parent is a sex offender. Because we all know how on the internet now it pops up sex offender in your area. Some of the things I had suggested was having a guardianship established with a relative, that they are the guardians for the child, so that your address doesn't show up as their address, to protect them from harassment. The other thing is powers of attorney. Some school districts will allow you to do a power of attorney to another relative so that a child can attend a different school, so that they're going to another school and people don't see them get off the school bus and say, oh, well, there's a sex offender that lives there. My son and his wife were moving out of their home, and these two about 12-year-olds came by on a bicycle, and my daughter-in-law was outside, and they said, is your husband a rapist? You know, the 12 and 13-year-olds that were aware that that house was the house of a sex offender. So these are just some suggestions. Even adoption, having a grandparent adopt the children. Name changes, changing their names. I know these seem to be extreme. With my own self, I think of my 4- and 6-year-old grandchildren and what it's going to be like for them in 5 years when they are old enough to start asking questions and their friends start asking questions. So these may seem extreme, but in the long run they may not be. Any questions?
Got a couple of comments.
Yes, sir.
Two different churches that I started attending asked me to leave. One of them said, it's best you don't come back here anymore.
Did you say churches?
Two different churches.
Okay, so you were denied access to churches because they don't like you.
Two
Okay.
Two separate ones. I finally found a church that's not perfect, but the pastor was very understanding. I went and talked to him before I even went in there. We belong there now for 8 years. We do anything we want to, as long as it doesn't involve the youth.
Well,
I also had two different times that I could have gotten revoked. One time, somebody spread a rumor out that I was making myself out to be a youth minister. The only thing I can think, there's people out there you don't even know just hate your guts.
Certainly, they're just going to be haters.
Trying to get me revoked. My PO at that time didn't buy it. Another time, when I got out of prison with my probation officer's permission and with the counselor's permission, we tried to set up an organization called Mature Christian Singles to pair up people that were over 55. I started visiting churches. One woman that was a friend of my ex-wife saw I was going there, and she spread the word that this sex offender is going around to all these churches. I guess the rumor mill went this way and that way and that way, and it got back to my probation officer that I was volunteering to babysit for parishioners' children when my wife was giving a kitchen and bath design seminar, which was completely bogus. Luckily, I had a good PO and he didn't buy that. I had to take a polygraph test though.
Sure. We only have a couple minutes left. I wanted to add this. As far as my probation restrictions, it's either 21 or 23 things. And if I'm not mistaken, it's number 19 says that I shall not drive alone. Especially, like, You've already made an absolute blanket that I can't do this, and now you're going to tack on more to it, especially where children are known to congregate. How would I go to work? But that's in there.
And one of the things about the restrictions on church activities, in Floyd County, they will allow you to go to church if you get a letter from the minister saying that he is aware and that all of the heads of the departments of the church are aware that the individual is a sex offender. But you cannot go to Bible study, you cannot sing in the choir, you cannot have any kind of a position of any sort of authority, even if it's the janitor at the church. I mean, what are we doing? I have written a couple of articles, and any of you who don't know me, if you look on the RSOL website, you might find some of them. But one of them is, have we gone crazy as a society? And I think the answer to that is we truly have. But I want to thank all of you who are here today, because the only way that we can bring some sanity back to our nation is to make people aware of the horrible, horrible things that we're doing to other people. And I thank you all today for being here. Thank you.